Last in our sequence of post-war architectures, where so far we've had a theme of timelessness, history, monumentality. In the last class we talked a lot about historicism and sort of trying to reinvent history for a modern context. Today what we're going to do, hopefully, is that we're going to sort of examine the theme of history in architecture. All right. Within its context. And today what we're going to talk about primarily at the beginning is the idea that architecture is actually very fragile. It is not timeless, although some of it will last for longer. And it is actually under constant threat. And what we're finally going to hit is this period during what we've talked about for the last couple of lectures about how historical value starts to reemerge politically. So what we see here on the first slide is this caricature of 19th century New York, where in the pursuit of absolute growth, they were sort of not really worried about what would be left behind. You can see this little building scheduled for demolition. This is 1776. And on this side, you see a picture inside the Museum of Islamic Art in 2011, after Egypt's early revolution, wondering what was missing and what had been damaged. Part of what we've been talking about in this class is what is a modern building and what is an ancient building. This is sort of the reason I don't ask you to do slide ideas. Is this an ancient building or a modern building? From your survey, this is an ancient building, right? This is the Parthenon, worship Athena, built 2,500 years ago. But this is not what it looked like back then, of course. The marbles were removed. They're in the British Museum in the colonial era. It actually blew up during the Ottoman War. In the early modern period, it looked like this. There was a church that was then a mosque. There was a village. So how did it come to look like this? Well, part of the reason is that in the modern nation state, you were trying to tie yourself to the past, so everything that was not of this period has been cleared. It's been restored, it's been glued back together. And of course, it is still, as an icon of national identity, a monument. Nobody goes there to worship the goddess for which it was built. It has taken on a new function. What about this building? This is the Pantheon in Rome. Again, you would have taken this in survey in the ancient period, built for the emperor to sit at the center of the world. The inside of this building is a complete, perfect sphere. The sun, the moon, the rain enters from the top. It is built out of materials from all over the empire. But in that period, you would not have seen it like this. It would not have been an object seen in the round. You would have proceeded through a forum. You would have assumed that that was a temple. You would have entered and you would have been awed by that space. During the papal remaking of Rome, it was turned into a church in the Baroque style, and even today, it still performs that way. When I was there 2 years ago, there was a mass. So is it an ancient temple, a Baroque church, or a modern building? In the late 19th century, as Italy finally begins to achieve some sort of nation state, the city begins to sort of take charge of its monuments and clashes with the church. And they decide to argue over who owns this building. The compromise is actually fairly unique in architecture. The city owns it from the middle of the wall out. The church owns it from the middle of the wall in, which makes restoration very difficult. And of course, Rome is an ancient city. It's a medieval city. And it's a 21st century city. There is a sense of sort of the eternal. Pyramids were actually only built in a very small period of Egypt history in the ancient world. Because as soon as they went up, they realized that they were basically telling looters where stuff was built. The guy who built this period, his pyramid, his mother's pyramid was looted. And soon after he died, the limestone cladding began to erase. The limestone cladding was very important because it was designed to capture the first rays of the sun as they peeked up over the valley and glowed like a furnace. This was a theater. Then it was turned into a residence. Off to the right is an aqueduct that goes straight through an apartment complex built in the late Middle Ages. Which one's a more valuable historical artifact? Are you going to evict the people living under the arches of the aqueduct whose families have owned that space for a generation? Does this building need to come down? The very fact that we're asking these questions is a particular attitude of the modern era. If you were to answer a question on this, and you have to do the date and the function would be as an arena for gladiatorial combat. But that was the least of its function in its 2,000-year history. It has been a castle, it's been a fortress, it's been housing, but mostly the Colosseum in Rome was used as a quarry. As Rome's population descended to under 20,000 after its fall and through the Middle Ages, people used existing buildings for parts for other buildings. Temples were dismantled to be used in churches. And quite frankly, you've got a little farm over here, you want to build a wall, why buy new stone when you can rip it off this one? It's called spolium. At the end of the 19th century, Rome decides to remake itself. And the new king, looking to harken back to his classical roots, the empire, keep in mind Italy will now conquer Ethiopia, it will be involved in Libya, sort of a latecomer to the European colonial game, will order the area around the Colosseum to be cleansed so that nothing but the building remains. From that period through Mussolini, the entire imperial forum will be dug out and anything not of the Roman era will be removed. Removing 2,000 years of accretive history. So that is all that is left. Victor Emmanuel will have a big classical monument built to himself, which you see here, and between him and Mussolini, they will want to connect the new imperial monument with the old one, the Colosseum, and so they will bulldoze this part of the city completely. Which looked like this not too long before. So all of this is gone. If you've been there, then you know that there is no architecture. So it looks like that. This is what it looked like, ostensibly, during the late imperial period. This is the model. The old forum, which isn't actually a design space, but a cluster of spaces is here. These are all the imperial fora, built by Julius Caesar on to Vespasian. These sort of original ones sort of off to this location. And these are all the contemporary ones from the empire. Here's Caesar's, here's Augustus, the very first emperor, Trajan, Vespasian, the Basilica. Whether or not those traces still exist at the end of the 19th century is unknown, because they decided to put the road right through here. What is left is this tiny little piece here, the market, which looked like that. Again, people had lived in them, they built on top of them. Some of these buildings are ancient, some of them are not. And this is what it looked like when it was first built, in theory. This is from a new museum that sort of animates this process, a very cool museum, I recommend it. And this is what shows what happened after Rome starts to decay. As the population drops, the buildings start to decay. And lo and behold, a little village appears in the interim. This is also part of its history, a little rural village. This would happen in large parts of Rome and other parts of Italy that are now sort of have achieved a massive population decline. The roof has fallen in. And when they start to excavate at the end of the 19th century, they start to find remnants. But at this particular time, unlike now, they are not really interested in all the remnants, only the Roman ones. So they begin to demolish it. Today, it looks like this. There's the road. They have actually now dug down past this, so we've seen some of these remnants, but that was not true of the case. Here is the Trajan's Market, and it has finally, after the last several years, been restored and reopened with a museum, which is both an ancient building and a modern building. Incidentally, if you're going to Rome, bring a podcast for the forum and your own map. The Tourist Guild is very, very strong, and there are no signs in the Roman Forum. You will not know what you're looking at. This building, on the other hand, is state-of-the-art. animations, new ways of communicating history. It's very frustrating. I forgot my book, or wander around and someone's like, what's that building? I'm like, I don't know. Is there a sign? No. Matt? No. But this building won an architectural award in 2010. There's a long history of reuse and repurposing. Under the Christian Byzantine, they built Hagia Sophia, hanging the dome as if from the hooks of God. When Constantinople gets turned into Istanbul, this gets converted into a mosque, and all the beautifully illustrated mosaics are painted over, as in traditional Islam, as in Judaism. There's a prohibition against graven images, except for this one, because the Christ figure is also a prophet. The Christians returned the favor in the 15th century, as after 500 years they boot the Moors out of Spain. The Moors, of course, and the Umayyads and after, transformed Spain into sort of an early Renaissance, where philosophers, Jews, Christians are all welcome. They build massive amounts of structures, many of which no longer remain, including this giant mosque, which was built after their mosque in Damascus, which we'll look at in a minute, starting like this. But of course, as the population grows, it has to be modified, and it still has a vestigial Roman form. Inside is one of the last unique versions of the double horseshoe arch, the stonemasons of which descendants would move north to build the Gothic cathedral. Yet this building wouldn't exist. And not they reconsecrated the site and inserted like a flying saucer this Gothic cathedral, therefore making of it a Christian monument. And ironically saving what is now a World Heritage Site. It is also important to remember that this building marks the beginning of this class. This is the onset of the colonial era. It is not too long after they've conquered Alhambra that Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama set out in two directions to discover the origin of pepper on the far side of the world. Charles V, who actually inserts a palace into the Alhambra that is every bit as discongruous in this, said, "You have taken something beautiful and making it commonplace." By now, of course, the law of the Indies are about to be in effect, and we're in South America. Arguably, the building that, in modern terms, has no reason to disappear is the oldest building in Christendom surviving. When in the 16th century, they decided to take a 1,000-year-old basilica and completely replace it with a new building. And because the project was so expensive, the popes began to sell things like indulgences, which so pissed off people like, I don't know, Martin Luther, that it caused the Protestant Reformation, leading to a wholesale change in Christianity for the next 400 years. This, of course, is an adapted Roman building, a basilica, turned sideways, with the apse at the back instead of on the side, but maintaining the atrium. And it was demolished and rebuilt under a whole succession of famous architects from Bramante to Bernini. And now it looks like that. Even this building, built 1,400 years ago, at the dawn of the rise of Islam in Damascus, is built on top of two former temples. The Temple of Jupiter, and you can see it sort of has a similar form to the early Christian mosque with a courtyard, and a church of the St. John the Baptist.